So I'm Marianne Heaslip. I'm, in this session, I'm from Terrace 21. In a later session, I'm from Urbed, which is my professional life. This is what I'm doing in my non-existent spare time. So I live in Liverpool. I live in the L8 area of Liverpool, which people outside of Liverpool tend to refer to as Toxteth. But you know, it's that area that you've probably heard about for riots previously, and then more recently and more excitingly, I guess, for winning the Turner Prize, which is bizarre. This is the street that won the Turner Prize. This is Cairn Street in L8, which when I moved into the area, so I've lived in Liverpool for almost 20 years. I moved into L8 about 7-8 years ago. And this is what it looked like not long after I moved in. One of the things to notice about it is that even though you can see most of the houses are derelict, there are these planters going down the street, and this was taken in early spring one year. So it's clearly not a street that is completely abandoned. But this is kind of why it was in that kind of state. This is one of the plans from the I think it was Central South Zone of Opportunity, it was called, as part of the Housing Market Renewal Initiative, which that didn't come any further south than Birmingham, but effectively it was a programme from the Labour government in the mid-2000s onwards that suggested that house prices in the north, in a lot of the inner cities of places like Liverpool and Manchester, were low, and this was a bad thing. And that the way that you solve that is basically by demolishing a lot of those houses in order to drive up demand. It was kind of, that's a gross oversimplification, but that was kind of the logic of it. And also that you build nice new developer houses, noddy boxes, that will attract new, better people into the area. And they were actually called better people by some of the council officers that I was talking to at the time. But the people who lived in the areas affected didn't really kind of just roll over and allow this to happen. And this is Granby area of L8, which, again, that's Cairn Street. And whilst it was always a mixed tenure area, there were housing association-owned properties, private landlords, and also owner-occupiers. So what happened throughout the housing market renewal process is that a lot of the housing association-owned properties, the housing associations did what they called decanting their tenants, which is they're not old wine or, it's very weird. But the owner-occupiers stayed, and a lot of them stayed and fought the demolition. What was really interesting in Granby is that they fought it not just through turning up at planning inquiries and sitting in front of bulldozers, which they did, but also by setting up a regular community market and doing gardening in the streets and showing that the place was loved and that there was a community here that cared about it. And the argument always was that there's nothing actually wrong with these houses. Some of it does go back to the riots, or what some of my friends in the area call the uprising, which this was always the most ethnically mixed area of Liverpool, and I think there was a degree of racism involved in how the area was treated. Basically, there was a red line drawn around it, and this is a bad area, we need to just demolish it, get rid of it. Obviously, the people that lived there didn't agree with that. There's a very long history that I'll just very briefly touch on now, but essentially what happened, the housing market renewal process didn't move as quickly as I think some of the people involved in it had hoped. So the last 4 streets in Granby, the last 4 terrace streets on the Granby Triangle, they never got as far as demolishing those, and that's partly because the residents slowed it down. Also because big top-down regeneration processes always take longer than people think they're going to. So that when the coalition government came in 2010, basically the council were left with a problem, because what they'd done was actually, when the housing associations had shipped out their tenants, Liverpool City Council had bought a lot of those properties. They'd also bought properties from owner-occupiers who'd moved out. So what the council were left in when the housing market renewal programme was cancelled was a load of empty, mostly derelict houses and no money to do them up. So that was a problem. There was a little pot of money from the Homes and Communities Agency, from the Empty Homes Fund, which did get used in this situation. But I suppose when people are talking about councils and councils building housing, it's worth being aware that Liverpool is a bit of a special case as well. There's an institutional history with what happened with Militant, where the council are very, very reluctant to build council housing because the last time anyone did that there, they got into quite a bit of bother. So the idea in 2011, when the council spent probably about 12 months trying to work out what the hell they were going to do, at the same time, the local community saw this as an opportunity, really. It was yeah, we talked about it being a tiny crack that we can maybe make a bit wider. But what the council decided they wanted to do in their wisdom was put the entire area, and we're talking about 250 houses or so, and about 170 of them, probably 180 of them were empty at the time. They put them out through an overdue notice for a private developer to come in and do the redevelopment work. They selected the preferred developer through that process, who were very nice and friendly to us until they were confirmed as the preferred developer, and then they stopped talking to us. But that collapsed as a deal probably about, it was another 2 years. So in all this time, the houses are obviously getting more and more dilapidated, so it's becoming more and more frustrating. That deal collapsed, and one of the residents who lives on Cairn Street, Eleanor Lee, sent, when we got wind that that whole deal had collapsed, partly because it was featured in Private Eye, if anyone wants to go back and have a look. She sent a paper around all the great and good called Silver Linings, and she's like, right, you've now tried top-down redevelopment in this area twice, once kind of private-public partnership, once entirely private-led. It hasn't worked. Can we please now look at what we've been talking about all along, of having a more mixed approach, having different people do things, having it be community-led. By this time, the Community Land Trust was set up. The housing co-op that Terrace 21, that I'm a member of, was set up, and in partnership with the CLT, we'd started having discussions with some of the housing associations who'd come around more to doing refurbishment rather than demolition and redevelopment. We kind of said, there's another way of doing things here, which is both less risky, because you're not reliant on one organisation doing everything, but also much more community-led, which we argued would be of benefit for the long-term sustainability and future of the area. So that was in 2013, which was also when Assemble were introduced to the process as well. So they came through. The Community Land Trust were introduced to a private philanthropic investor who actually, without him getting involved, none of what happened since would have happened, because he gave a soft loan to the CLT. The CLT, after it was about a year of negotiations probably, was agreed with the City Council that the CLT would develop 10 houses, start for 10. Terrace 21 would do 5. There would be a number of pound houses, so that's where you get a license to build for £1, you do some of the work yourself until it's a mortgageable property, and then the lease transfers from the City Council. And then housing associations were involved as well, doing both shared ownership and social rent. So there's a really big mix in the area, where that's very short, and probably not quite short enough, tale of what happened and how we got to the point where Terrace 21 were involved as a partner, because what we realised was there was social housing, there was potentially some private for sale housing, There's the pound houses, which are great as a kind of self-build thing, but they're questionable in terms of affordability, because you would basically have to have 20 grand in the bank and the wherewithal to do some of the work yourself, which isn't true of everyone. And there was some kind of private for sale and some owner-occupiers. There wasn't anything for kind of people like the members of Terrace 21, many of whom are in their 20s, 30s, kind of classic first-time buyers, but many of them self-employed, on lower, modest incomes, so we've got teaching assistants and handymen. So Terrace 21 was really formed to fill a gap in the market there, and that's kind of what came first, because this project, I think it's slightly different to Lilac in that this came from a particular area and from a particular situation, rather than the idea of the MHOS kind of existing first and then finding a site. And then the other part of it, which I'll talk about a bit more with Jonathan later, is that when we were talking about affordability, the other side of affordability is we're looking at terrace housing, and a lot of the time, if you don't do anything to it, the fuel bills for living decently in a terrace house are going to be about £1,000 a year or more. And we're not talking about big houses, we're talking about 2 and 3 bed terraces. So we were concerned about the environmental side of things, but we always said it wasn't because we were a bunch of hippies, although no doubt some of us are. It was because we were bothered about long-term affordability from that point of view as well, and that we need to keep people's overall housing costs down. So yeah, this is just looking at all the other stuff that goes with that a lot of it is to do with being more environmentally sustainable, but it is also about keeping costs down. I won't go into this too much, but again, this is probably just to emphasize that the slight complexity of the MHOS process and model. And like the guys from Lilac talked about, this isn't something that is suitable for people on housing benefit or people on very, very low incomes. Though again, I think the person with the lowest income in our group is probably on about 10 grand a year. So it's not beyond the realms of possibility for a lot of people. The other thing is that it's not, although I think it was very much mutual home ownership was started as something for kind of first-time buyers. What we found is that a couple of members of our group are people who've been burned by the housing market before as well. So they've either been through some personal crisis or family issue that has meant that they now maybe kind of own part of a house or once owned a house, so they have some capital, but they've now stopped giving mortgages to people once they're over a certain age as well. So, you know, there's a member of our co-op who's in her early 60s, has a bit of money, doesn't qualify for social housing, but also can't get a mortgage. So this is a model that allows her to have somewhere secure to live. We'll skip over that because I just want to come on to some of the barriers. So we've been at this now, well, we've been talking about it for probably about 4 years. Realistically, it's been a possibility for the last 2.5 years since the private developer wholesale deal fell through. But it's felt a lot of the time like we've been jumping through hoops, and the size of those hoops has varied. And we're currently, so it's about finding land and the property, and obviously this project grew out of solving an existing problem in an existing particular area. So that was relatively simple for us because that was the problem we were trying to solve. Setting up the MHOS, which is not simple, and then it's this securing land and securing finance, and we've been kind of stuck in that loop for a little while because the City Council own the properties, are going to give them to us on a lease and transfer for a negligible sum, but until we know the exact terms of that lease, we can't get a mortgage offer, and we just keep going around this circle. And we've been going around that circle for about the last 12 months. So, and then we're hoping once that's done, that I could be being overly optimistic, we'll be able to secure the rest of the finance or put some of our own money in, then actually build, then move in, which we're hoping to do next year. But just very quickly, talking about the barriers, these are, I think, what the barriers are to what we're trying to do and why it's taken us so long. And I should say that we're not, as a group, although people aren't generally incredibly wealthy, we are probably more highly educated than the rest of the average population. You know, most people in the group have degrees or professions, so it's not people who aren't used to dealing with complex bureaucracy, but it still takes a lot of time and effort. So these are just a few suggestions about what we might be able to do. The land and property issue, the self-build register, is potentially an interesting one, although Liverpool City Council have told us, even though we've been talking to them for years, that there is no demand for that in Liverpool. I think that's questionable. Property values, we kind of have the opposite problem to what you probably have in places like Oxford and London, in that the property values in the area we're developing in are quite low, and we want to spend a decent amount of money on these houses to make them fit for the 21st century. And we're limited by how much we can get a mortgage for, because obviously there's the loan-to-value constraint. We're lucky in that we're not a private developer, so we're not looking to make a margin. So that helps a lot, because we can put that margin into better insulation and better windows. Time is a big one. Keeping going and keeping up interest when something takes this long and when you've got a life to live. And I think the big one that I just wanted to mention as well, because it's really affected Liverpool, is the local authority cuts. So one of the things that's added time to this is the fact that the council officers we've been speaking to keep taking on extra responsibilities, moving post, because they've had a practically 50% budget cut in the last few years. So that is a really big issue for groups like this. But yeah, so that I think is me done. And I just wanted to leave you with a picture like that, because these are the houses that the CLT have developed in Cairn Street. They've just recently finished those earlier this year. They're starting on their next 3. So it is happening, and we do have hope, but it's not without its issues. All right, thank you.